We'll get going. Heavenly Father, we thank you for today, and just thank you for the ways you bless us, the way you take care of us, and we just pray that today would be a wonderful day of fellowship, and that it would be pleasing to you, and we leave here being more like your Son than when we came. Pray these things in Christ's name. Amen. All right, did everybody make it to Sunday school, Jeremiah?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. Jeremiah is the second adult in my family this week, because my wife has gone, I don't know where the cordless mic is. It's right there. I got it.
I won't need it. They're both gone.
I know. Well, someone else is going to have to step up because Chris isn't here because he's down in New York, and my wife was at a ladies' conference. So we'll see what happens. I usually cover an extraordinary amount of ground on these kind of weeks. All right, so we're going to finish up the book of Judges. We will be in chapter 19, and we'll probably get into Ruth. We'll see how far we get. So we looked at the first part of the book where we were looking at the leadership of Israel, and we saw the degradation. So Gideon, he has 70 kids, and then he has a son of a concubine who kills the rest of them. So his children are all killed, and he leaves behind an idol. Jephthah has a daughter, and he kills her and goes to war with Ephraim. And then Samson kills himself and dies childless. And then his very tribe is going to walk away from their inheritance and set up an idolatrous house of worship that's going to last into the time of David. And that's what we started looking at the end of last class. So chapter 18, we get a little picture, chapter 17, of just one family in the hill country of Ephraim. And it's just crazy. And I was talking with Chris this past week. Geography is not my thing. But it turns out, so Shiloh, the location of the tabernacle throughout this whole period, is in Ephraim. And remember, Israel is not a large place. We're talking the size of New Jersey. A little bit bigger at this time, probably. And so, in the very same territory as the house of God, Micah is doing this crazy idolatry. All right, and then in 18, we saw the tribe of Dan, which again was Samson's tribe. Not only do they leave their inheritance, but they go and they steal Micah's idols and his priest, and they're going to go up to Laish, and they are going to kill a bunch of people that God never told them to, and they're going to take over that area. All right, and we ended in 18 verse 21. So they set up Micah's carved image that he made as long as the house of God was at Shiloh. All right, and so we started with just one family. Then we zoomed out, we looked at a whole tribe, and now we're going to zoom out again, and we're going to look at the whole nation. All right? And it's going to start, this account is going to finish off the book with these 3 chapters, and this is just utter insanity. Yeah, it is. It's absolutely crazy. And so we start here, and again, so in those days, when there was no king in Israel, so there's this repetitive phrase, because the book of the Judges is here to get us from Joshua to David. A certain Levite was sojourning in the remote part of the hill country of Ephraim, who took himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. And so these 2 locations keep coming up. Okay, the hill country of Ephraim, and we keep getting this association with Bethlehem. And here we have another Levite. Okay, so we're supposed to see these connections in these stories, these common themes. All right, and remember, Shiloh, the house of God, was in Ephraim. All right, so this is a Levite who's in the same area as the household of God, and he goes down to Bethlehem. Bethlehem keeps coming up because Bethlehem's the city of David. All right, so his concubine was unfaithful to him, and she went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah and was there some 4 months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. He had with him his servant and a couple of donkeys. All right, and so already this is just a very weird situation. All right, so the Levite has a concubine. Concubine is unfaithful to him. He goes to get her. They're hanging out at the father's house. And so down in verse 10, they finally leave. But the man would not spend the night. He rose up and departed and arrived opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. He had with him a couple of saddled donkeys, and his concubine was with him. When they were near Jebus, the day was nearly over, and the servant said to his master, "Come now, let us turn aside to the city of the Jebusites to spend the night in it." And his master said to him, "We will not turn aside into the city of foreigners who do not belong to the people of Israel, but we will pass into Gibeah." And we're going to find out that it probably would have been a better idea to go to Jerusalem. And he said to his young man, "Come, let us draw near to one of the places to spend the night at Gibeah or Ramah." So they passed on and went by their way. And so they end up staying in Gibeah, for this is it's the city of Benjamin. And it says, they went in and sat down at the open square of the city, for no one took him to his house to spend the night. So verse 16. Behold, an old man was coming from his work in the field at evening. The man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was sojourning in Gibeah. The men of the place were Benjamites. So again, this is another person from the hill country of Ephraim. And he lifted up his eyes and saw the traveler in the open square of the city. And the old man said, "Where are you going, and where do you come from?" And he said, "We are passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote places of the hill country of Ephraim, from which I come. I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm going to the house of the Lord. But no one has taken me into his house." And so the old man finds out this guy's from the same place that I am. And so then he invites him to stay. And he tells him, "Don't spend the night in the square." And so this story is supposed to start sounding familiar. Okay? And if you're not with it yet, you'll find out here in a second. So verse 22, as they were making their hearts merry, behold, certain men in the city, worthless fellows, surrounded the house, beating on the door. And they said to the old man and the master of the house, "Bring out the man who came into your house, that we may know him." All right, so we're talking about what? It's Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is playing itself out again here in the area around Benjamin. Even there's a little nod to Jerusalem, because that was where Melchizedek was king. And so again, 23, and the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, "No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly, since this man has come into my house. Do not do this foul thing. Behold, here are my virgin daughters and his concubine." So again, it's just playing exactly out the same way it was before, except this time there's no angel to save the family. And so they end up, the Levite throws his concubine out. And they knew her, and they abused her all night until morning. As the dawn began to break, they let her go. Verse 26. And as morning appeared, the woman came and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was until it was light. And so her master he's going to the house of the Lord, but he's not a godly person. Verse 27. And her master rose up in the morning, and when he opened the doors of the house and went out to go his way, behold, there was his concubine lying at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. But he said to her, "Get up, let us be going." But there was no answer. Then he put her on the donkey, and the man rose up and went away to his house. And then it gets crazier. 29, and when he entered his house, he took a knife, and taking hold of his concubine, he divided her limb by limb into 12 pieces and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. And all who saw it said, "Such a thing has never happened or been seen from the day that the people of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak." So the people of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead, and the congregation assembled at one man to the Lord at Mizpah. This has probably been a little bit of revision, because we find out as we go along, this is probably happening fairly early within the account of Judges, because Aaron's grandson, Phinehas or Phinehas, is still the high priest, so it would have been Eleazar's son. And so, and the land of Gilead, that's where Jephthah, and there was a bunch of judges there. So it's kind of taking the whole history here. And so they're going to come down, And it says in verse 2 of Judges 20, and the chief of all the people and all the tribes of Israel presented himself in the assembly of the people of God. 400,000 men on foot drew the sword. Now the people of Benjamin heard that the people of Israel had gone to Mizpah. And the people of Israel said, tell us, how did this evil happen? And the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered him and said, I came to Gibeah, that belongs to Benjamin. I and my concubine to spend the night, and the leaders of Gibeah rose against me and surrounded the house against me by night. They meant to kill me, and they violated my... he minimizes his contribution to the circumstances. And he says, it was the leaders of Gibeah rose against me and surrounded the house against me by night. They meant to kill me and violate my concubine, and she is dead. So I took hold of my concubine and cut her in pieces and sent her throughout all the country of the inheritance of Israel, for they have committed abominations and outrage in Israel. Behold, you the people of Israel, all of you, give your advice and counsel here. So there's a big council, and the next paragraph basically, we're going to go down to Gibeah and we're going to kill them for what they've done. And so next paragraph, starting in verse 12, they send men to Benjamin saying, what is this evil that has taken place among you? Give us the men of Gibeah. But the Benjamites say no. And so the tribe of Benjamin unite in defense of the city of Gibeah. And now we are going to have war between the tribe of Benjamin and the rest of Israel. And so they're going to go to Bethel, which is a city, I think it's close to Shiloh. It's often associated with Shiloh. And it's crazy. Verse 18. So the people of Israel arose and went up to Bethel and inquired of God, who shall go up first for us to fight against the people of Benjamin? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up first. This is a common theme. And so they go out, and verse 21, the people of Benjamin came out of Gibeah and destroyed on that day 22,000 men of the Israelites. And so they lose. Verse 23, and the people of Israel went up and wept before the Lord until the evening, and they inquired of the Lord, shall we again draw near to fight against our brothers, the people of Benjamin? And the Lord said, go up against them. And they're going to go up again, and they're going to lose again. And 18,000 men of the people of Israel are going to die. And so twice they go up and inquire of God, and God says, go ahead. And he doesn't give them victory. And so finally, it says in 26, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze.
Bless you.
Thank you. I am. Verse 26, then all the people of Israel, the whole army, went up and came to Bethel and wept, and they sat there before the Lord, and they fasted that day until evening, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And so I think now they're finally doing what they're supposed to have been doing. And the people of Israel inquired of the Lord, for the ark of the covenant of God was there in those days, and Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, ministered for it in those days, saying, shall we go out once more to battle against our brothers, the people of Benjamin, or shall we cease? And the Lord said, go up, for tomorrow I will give them into your hands. And so now God says, go up, and I will give you victory. And I do think that is in response to the mourning and the fasting and the offerings that they made. And so this time they go up and they are going to have victory. And in verse 35, and the Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel, and the people of Israel destroyed 25,100 men of Benjamin that day. And though these were men who drew the sword, so the people of Benjamin saw that they were defeated. And so now they go to Gibeah. And the battle continues, and so the Benjamites go off into kind of I think it's called the rock of something or other. What is it called? Yeah, the rock of Rimmon, and remained at the rock of Rimmon for 4 months. Okay, so this is the men of the army. In verse 48, and the men of Israel turned back against the people of Benjamin and struck them with the edge of the sword, city, men, and beast, and all that they found. And all the towns they found they set on fire. And so the Benjamite army is defeated, and they go off into this, probably an area of kind of natural fortification, and Israel is just going through and they're slaughtering and burning the tribe of Benjamin. To the point where it seems that they actually kill all the women and children. Because we get to chapter 21. Now the men of Israel had sworn at Mizpah, no one of us shall give his daughter in marriage to Benjamin. And the people came to Bethel and sat there till evening before God. And they lifted up their voice and wept bitterly. And they said, O Lord, the God of Israel, why has this happened in Israel, that today there should be one tribe lacking in Israel? Which again, it's just absolutely crazy. Because they're asking, how could this possibly happen? Well, it's just because you went through and killed everybody. Because you thought that was a good idea. So they've gone overboard now in their punishment of Benjamin, and now they're regretting their actions because there's not going to be a next generation of Benjamites because they've killed everybody, and they made a vow that no one is going to give his daughter in marriage to Benjamin. And so they next day they go, they built, and then, so verse 4, and the next day the people rose early and built there an altar and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings, which they should not have been doing. That's the priests need to do this. So then the people of Israel said, which of all the tribes of Israel did not come out in the assembly of the Lord? So they got to figure this out. Okay, so how are we going to solve this problem? So they're going to find a city, Jabesh Gilead, who didn't come to the assembly. And so they send an army to go there to kill also everybody, all the men, every woman that has had a child, and all the kids. But leave all the young virgins. And so they kill everybody there, and they get 400 young virgins. And then they send word, verse 13, to the people of Benjamin who are at the rock of Rimmah, and said, okay, come back, and here's some wives. So this is the solution. But then, there's not enough. Okay? So they're like, okay, we need more wives for the tribe of Benjamin, but we can't find any more cities that didn't come up to the assembly, so what are we going to do? So in verse 16, here's the plan. They're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. There's a yearly feast of the Lord at Shiloh. There was 3 of them. We don't know. I don't think we know which one this was. But here's the plan. So when everybody goes down to the feast, Benjamites, you guys go and you hide in the vineyards. All right? And when the young women come out to dance, you can kidnap them. And we just won't chase them down and punish you. And so this is the plan. This is their idea. This is how we're going to fix this problem. Okay? And so that's what they do. It says, verse 22, when their fathers or their brothers come to complain to us, we will say to them, grant them graciously to us, because we did not take for each man of them his wife in battle, neither did you give them to them, else you would now be guilty. So this way, Benjamin gets wives, nobody breaks their oath, everybody's happy. You know, except for the young women who get kidnapped, you know. And so then, here verse 25, in those days there's no king in Israel, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And so this just gives you, Israel is basically now Canaanite. All right, we see it in the leadership, okay? Gideon believes in idol, makes an idol for the people to worship. Jephthah sacrifices his daughter. Remember, that was one of the sins that the Canaanites were being condemned for, child sacrifice. Samson is into prostitution. And I believe he represents as Israel, who again is called to be holy. He was a Nazirite, breaks all the vows, does what is right in his own eyes. His spiritual blindness is manifested in his physical blindness. Okay, and then we look at the people. We start with just one family. In the hill country of Ephraim, where Shiloh is, the family is apostate. The tribe of Dan is apostate. And then, we have within the tribe of Benjamin, basically Sodom and Gomorrah reborn. All right? And then the entire tribe of Benjamin would rather fight against the other tribes than turn over Sodom and Gomorrah reborn. And then now basically Israel, we saw this with Jephthah fighting against the Ephraimites, and we see it here. They're fighting amongst themselves just like the Canaanite city-states were. And when they, in this whole just repeated foolishness within the tribes of Israel as they're dealing with the sin of the Gibeonites and what's going on here with Benjamin. And they're building altars, which they shouldn't be doing, and how they're solving these problems is absolutely ridiculous. So we got about 400-something years here where we've, from the beginning, when those tribes did not do what they were supposed to do and drive out the remaining Canaanites, and God says, I'm going to leave them here to test you, Israel has failed the test. And now they're just as bad, or they're showing the same characteristics as those people that God said needed to be wiped out. And so we need a new Moses and we need a new Joshua. Okay? Now I guess as part of that transition, you flip the page, let's look at the Book of Ruth. Okay, so the Book of Ruth takes place within the same time frame. We see this in Ruth 1:1, in the days when the judges ruled. All right? And many commentators believe that the Book of Ruth was actually originally part of the Book of Judges, that it was a fourth story in the back. And that it was removed because the tone of it was so different than the rest of the book. But I think we got to make sure this connection is made because the Book of Ruth is going to stand in contrast to the Book of Judges. Right? Because remember, I said that the key verse of the Book of Judges was that last one. There is no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. Okay? Before we're done with the Book of Ruth, the very last paragraph of the Book of Ruth is going to be, now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Abinadab. Abinadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz, who is one of our two principal characters. The book actually, the story is about Naomi, and then Ruth and Boaz and their relationship with her. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered who? David. Okay, so there's the king we need. There's the king that God has called to shepherd his people. All right? And while every man is doing what his own eyes, we are going to see three individuals, mostly Ruth and Boaz, who, and I guess Naomi counts too. Yeah, Naomi counts too. Who are not doing what is right in their own eyes. They're living according to the law. And, again, Israel, they were supposed to be God's representative of how to love him and how to love everybody else, so that if the Gentiles wanted to love God and wanted to love everybody else, they could become part of Israel. Okay? And the whole story of Judges is Israel becoming like the Gentiles. But in the story here, we're going to have a Gentile who joins Israel. Okay? And so Ruth is the flip side of the book. That even though Israel was turning into Canaanites, even though every man did what was right in his own eyes, and even though there was no king in Israel, there were still Israelites who were faithful. There were still Gentiles who, through interaction with those faithful Israelites, were becoming Jews and loving God and loving people. And God had a plan to bring about his king who was going to shepherd his people of Israel. And that's the book of Ruth. So we can start walking through and see how the whole thing. And again, we're going to see some of these things comes up. So, verse 1, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah, again, Bethlehem and Judah is coming up again, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. So again, we have Ephraim, Bethlehem. Okay, but now the story is getting flipped. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years. Both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman were left without her 2 sons and her husband. Okay, so then Ruth is going to get up and say, all right, my husband's dead, your husbands are dead. She hears that the famine is done, and so she's going to go home to Judah. Verse 8, Naomi said to her 2 daughters, go return each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. And so she said, let the Lord grant you new husbands. That she kissed them and lifted up their voice and wept. So it sounds like, this was a family, they were a good family. Okay? And Naomi is faithful. And so verse 10, they said to her, no, we will return with you to your people. And Naomi says, no, look, I'm not going to have any more kids. They may become your husbands. Again, she's alluding to levirate marriage. Turn back. Verse 14, then they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Verse 15, and she said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you, return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. And so we don't have any details about this family, really. But whatever's going on, Ruth has experienced the gospel. She has experienced what it's like to love God and to love others. And so she is saying, I am going with you. And your God's going to be my God, your people's going to be my people. And so Ruth is a faithful Gentile, and she's going to go and she's going to become part of the Commonwealth of Israel. And so they go back, and they come to Bethlehem. And everybody's like, oh, is this Naomi? Verse 20, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara. Naomi means pleasant, Mara means bitter. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. And so what we're going to see here now in these next few chapters is an example of godly Israelites living out the law. And it's going to be 2 specific aspects of the law. And the first one that we're going to see is the commandments within the law to take care of the poor. All right? And so, chapter 2. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. So the way this was supposed to work is, in addition to the Sabbath year, where every 7 years you're supposed to let your land lay fallow for the rejuvenation of the rest of the land. Excuse me. You were not supposed to glean in the corners, so that the poor in Israel could come and they could glean in the corners in order to get food. This is related to the stuff that we were talking about earlier in Matthew chapter 12, where the disciples were gleaning from the grains. Okay? And so there is, Boaz is called a worthy man. We're going to learn more about him as we go. And so Boaz, he is allowing people to do this in his fields. Okay? Because he is a godly man. He is a faithful Jew. Okay, so even though everybody else is doing what is right in their own eyes, Boaz is being faithful, and he is allowing the poor to come and glean in his fields. And so Ruth's like, let me go do this. And Naomi's like, go ahead. And so she goes. Verse 3, so she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. So we're getting these indications of Boaz's faithfulness. And so Boaz inquires, who's the young woman? And she says she is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. Verse 7, she said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. And so Boaz is like, who's that? And they're like, that's Ruth. She is the daughter-in-law of Naomi. She asked. And so then Boaz goes to Ruth, verse 8. Now listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young woman. Let your eyes be on the field they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. And so Boaz is a good person. And so he says, stay here, you'll be safe. When you're thirsty, you can drink from the same vessels as the young men. And so he is encouraging Ruth to do this stuff. And so then she bows down, asks him, why are you doing this? And 11, but Boaz answered, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, how you left your father and mother in your native land and come to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Then she said, I found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I'm not one of your servants. And so, Boaz, he is doing what it is that God has called Israel to do. And he's recognizing that this is a Moabite woman, but she has come to find shelter under the God of Israel, which is what they're supposed to be doing. And she is being faithful to her mother-in-law, fourth commandment, and she is looking into the law and reaping as the provision that God has given. So he's being obedient, and he's doing what God has called. She's being obedient, she's doing what God has called. It's all working out. And then, again, we keep getting these examples of Boaz being faithful. So in the next paragraph, he's going to feed her. And then verse 15, when she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, do not reproach her. So in the air, outside of the corners. And also pull out some from the bundles for her and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her. And so there was another part of the law that is, if the people, as they were gathering the bundles, if one of them fell, they weren't supposed to pick it up. They were supposed to leave it. And the poor could come and pick them up. And so he's telling the young men, intentionally drop some of these so that Ruth can pick them up. Boaz is a godly man. And he wants to make sure that the poor in his family are taken care of. And so in 17, so she gleans in the field until evening. Then she beats out what she has gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley, 3/5 of a bushel, or 22 liters. And then, so she goes back, and Naomi's like, where did you go today? And she said, the man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. And so that's going to become important. 21, and the Ruth the Moabite said, besides, he said to me, you shall keep close by my young men until you finish with all my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with this young woman, lest in another field you be assaulted. So again, not everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. So she kept close to the young woman of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and the wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. All right, and so she brings up this idea, he's one of our redeemers. And this goes to this other aspect of the law, where if let's say you were doing your thing, and you were poor, and so you had a field, and so you sold the field to get money. The way this was supposed to work is one of your close relatives was supposed to buy that field back and give it to you. Okay, and the family was supposed to take care of family and to make sure that nobody was destitute. Okay? And this is going to come up here a little bit later in the book. Okay? And so, in the next paragraph, Naomi is going to she's not plotting and scheming. This is like she's doing what's right. And so she says, chapter 3, verse 1, Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, should I not seek rest for you that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative with whose young woman you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he's finished eating and drinking. But when he lays down, observe the place where he lays, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. And she replied, all that you say I will do. And so Naomi is trying to get Ruth married to Boaz. And we're now going to be invoking levirate marriage, which we've talked about. And that's going to happen. The next paragraph, and he wakes up, and who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. And the word there for wings, this is the same word for the corners of the prayer shawls, where the tassels would hang. All right? And it's a play on words back into chapter 2, when Boaz says to her that the Lord repay you for what you've done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Like Boaz gave this blessing to her, and now Ruth, again, Naomi told her to say this, but now Ruth is requesting of Boaz that he be the fulfillment of the blessing that Boaz himself proclaimed upon her, and that he redeem. Okay? Which in this context is, she is asking for levirate marriage. Okay? Because Naomi's husband, Elimelech, died without an heir because his son died. All right? And Abimelech doesn't have an heir in Israel to inherit his land anymore. So now, according to levirate marriage, a close relative is supposed to marry the wife, and their first child would be the heir of Elimelech. All right? So she is coming to Boaz, and she's saying, you blessed me and said that I to find my full reward from God, under whose wings. So I'm now asking you to spread your wings over me. You are the redeemer for Naomi and for me, because my husband is dead and her husband is dead. All right? And he said, in verse 10, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. Remember, because at the very beginning of the book, he was a worthy man. So she's someone who, she's faithful. And he knows this about her. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning he will redeem you. Good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until morning. And so again, this is a picture of Boaz. Remember, because this is every man did what was right in his own eyes. Does Boaz want to marry Ruth? Yes. But he recognizes that legally there is a redeemer closer than him. And so he's going to do this, but he's going to do it in a way that is in obedience to the law. Okay. And so he gives her more food. He says, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. And so she goes back. In verse 18, Naomi replied, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. And so now Boaz, in the same way that Naomi is looking at, she's trying to figure that out, Boaz is like, okay, we're going to do this the right way, but he's going to set it up in such a way that everybody's happy. Okay, because I think he knows something about this Redeemer. All right? So, chapter 4. And again, this is probably like one of the best pictures we have of practical application of a lot of these aspects of the law. Because in chapter 4, now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there. So this is the gate of the city. This is where business takes place. And behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." And they sat down. And so now, we're going to conduct business. And he got the elders of the city. They sat down at the gates. This is how you do this. All right? Then he said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to her relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there's no one beside you to redeem it, and I come after you." And so, he's invoking this law. And he's saying, Naomi still has the right to this piece of land. She's going to sell it. So I thought I'd let you know, because you're the closest relative, we're supposed to redeem, and so that you can redeem it. But if you don't want to redeem it, I'm the next closest relative, I'll redeem it. And so the guy says, "I will redeem it." And then Boaz says, "Okay, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in its inheritance." Saying, oh, well, if you're going to be the redeemer, you also need to marry Ruth, because levirate marriage. Then the redeemer said, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption to yourself, for I cannot redeem it." Now, this was the custom of former times in Israel concerning the redeeming and exchanging of confirming a transaction. The one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. And this is the shoe covenant. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself," he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders of all his people, "You are witness this day I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilon and to Mahlon. And Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers, from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day." Then all the people who were at the gate of the elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together build up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephraim and be renowned in Bethlehem. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring of the Lord will give you by this young woman." And so Boaz redeems both the property and Ruth. Verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the woman of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son is born to Naomi." They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. And so Obed is now the inheritor of Elimelech. And Boaz has purchased, redeemed all that land. And what's interesting is that thing that the other redeemer was afraid of, that his inheritance would be mucked up, apparently Boaz doesn't care, because now this child, who is the heir of Elimelech, now becomes part of Boaz's line, which is of the royalty of Judah. And so again, he's even like, he just assumed, he just took all of Naomi's stuff and said, now your family is my family. And he brought them all together. Jeremiah, want to do me a favor?
Why couldn't the other man marry Ruth?
So the way it worked was, when you had the levirate marriage, so if this guy had married Ruth, then the first child that they had would not have been his heir. The first child would have been the heir of Elimelech. And so I think what's going on here is this guy didn't want to have the potential of the inheritance getting mixed up. and have somehow his inheritance hooked in with the inheritance of Elimelech, which appears that Boaz doesn't care about. He's fine with this. And so there's even, I think, a little contrast going on there. Because that is the reason that was given, is that he didn't want to endanger his own inheritance. Because land, staying in families was very important. And I think Boaz, knowing this, went about this way, because it never actually, there probably was, some more stuff going on there. Like, the idea for Naomi to sell the land probably came from Boaz. Or at least somehow, he kind of worked this whole thing out that everybody got what they wanted. And, yeah. So, again, the whole book stands in contrast to the book of Judges. That even while all this crazy, because this is in the middle of all that nutso that was going on with Dan, with Benjamin, all that stuff, there were still godly people in Israel. All right? Naomi experienced what it was like to love God and to love people in the family of Naomi, to the point when Naomi went back, Ruth went with her and said, I will follow your God. I will leave my home behind. I will leave my gods behind, and I'm going to follow your God, and I'm going to stay with you. And then she is faithful to her mother-in-law, and she's faithful to go out and work and labor. And Boaz is faithful to let her do that. And he is also faithful that he blesses her beyond that. And it's not just, well, I'll grudgingly allow you to work in my fields, but I will also let her work the whole field, drop some stuff for her. And then he redeems her. And then he testifies to her faithfulness. She's a worthy woman. And then he wants to make sure that he redeems her in a way that honors God and honors the law. And then when it even comes down to the inheritance, it's all good. Jeremiah, do you got the mic? Can you bring it up to Michelle?
So back to this other Redeemer who had first dibs, if you will.
Yeah.
As you were talking and explaining, the more I started to understand how it all comes back to our free will and our choice, and how Proverbs 3 says, lean not on your own understanding, and that's kind of what this first Redeemer did. He, rather than where Boaz put his trust in God, that God's plan was better than his plan, this other Redeemer was fine.
I need to protect my own inheritance.
As long as it was just the land, but once it meant that he had to also become the Levirate in marriage, that was, well, I don't know if I can take that step.
Right,
I'd rather lean on what I know
Yeah.
in my own inheritance rather than trust.
Yeah. Yep. And so that, again, that's that contrast of every man doing what is in his own eyes versus, being faithful. Okay, so there's still faithful people. There's still godly people in Israel. There's still godly people that are influenced the Gentiles, such that the Gentiles are joining Israel to learn how to love God and love people. And God is working in those people to bring a king who's going to shepherd the people of Israel. And then we end with this genealogy that we started with, and it's going to take all the way back to Perez. And Perez, and I think this is part of it, is because Perez was the result of a levirate marriage. Because this was the story of Judah all the way back in Genesis. We talked about this, where in Genesis chapter 38, where Judah takes Tamar to be the wife of his eldest son, who dies. And then Judah's brother marries her to raise up offspring, and he dies. And then the next brother dies. And then Judah figures, maybe I don't want to give my fourth son to her. And so he sends her away, and she ends up deceiving him into thinking she's a temple prostitute, and he becomes his own levirate father. And so this is a story about Obed is the result of a levirate marriage that's good. And so it takes it back to Perez, who was the result of a levirate marriage that wasn't good. And it's going to go down through Nahshon, who was the prince of Judah at the time of the Exodus. And then Salmon was the guy that married Rahab. And so it connects it to, again, the history of the people of God and God working in these really unusual circumstances with Judah and this weird levirate marriage, and then Rahab the prostitute that he saved, and now she becomes part of this line, and Boaz fathers Obed, and Obed is now part of this line, and then Obed's going to father Jesse, and Jesse's going to father David. All right, so again, the point of the book is to work us through this transition, okay, and now we're heading to David. All right, and now that leads us to 1 Samuel. All right, and we're going to hit a new kind of tradition of Old Testament history, and this is going to back us up again into the time of Judges, and it's going to give us the historical content of this transition. And there's going to be very much a parallel here. Okay, I guess before we start working on Samuel, we've got a few minutes. Any last comments or anything on the book of Judges? I mean, there was a lot of stuff in there. I skipped a lot. But mostly, if you get the picture of just how crazy Israel has gotten, contrasted with the faithfulness of God in the book of Ruth, then we got it. And that's what we're kind of working through. Okay. All right. So the way this is going to work is, so when we look at, I've talked about in the past, you have the Jewish Tanakh, and you think you're supposed to pronounce that with a harder K. And so this is Torah, and this is some Jewish word that means prophets that I can't remember, and this is some Jewish word that means writings. All right, and so the Torah, again, is the first 5 books. And then once we hit the prophets, we are continuing, things start diverging from our Old Testament and the Old Testament of the Hebrews. For example, Ruth is over there in the writings. It's part of is it the 4 scrolls or the 5 scrolls? There's a group of, I think it's the 5 scrolls. There's a group of smaller books that were read at certain festivals. Ruth was one of those. Joshua was the first prophet within the prophets. And then the book of Judges is in there. And then what we look at as 1st and 2nd Samuel within the Jewish Old Testament is 1st Kingdoms. And what we look at 1st and 2nd Kings is 2nd Kingdoms. And so these 2 books, the 2 books in the Jewish Old Testament, were associated with each other as the story of this period of time from when Saul becomes king all the way through the time of the Babylonian exile. All right? And so these 4 books are kind of understood as to be like one kind of chunk together. All right? Go ahead.
And then does Chronicles go with the 2 kingdoms, or does it
So
go
Chronicles is part of the writings in the Jewish Old Testament. And we move it here because after the Torah, we try to put the books in, the historical books in some form of chronological order. And 1st and 2nd Chronicles comes from a different writing tradition, which like 1st, 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings were probably completed at some point during the exile or right after, because that's where it ends chronologically, whereas 1st and 2nd Chronicles were completed after the exile and looks back, and it goes from the kingship of David all the way through when Cyrus says, all right, you guys can go back. And so it backs up and then goes a little bit farther. All right, so we're going to work through 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings as kind of like a chunk. And the way this is going to work is there's a little bit of a parallel. So coming out of the book of Judges, so we had Moses. I think I wrote this on the board last week. And then we have Joshua. And then we have the Levitical priesthood. Okay, and we have the prophets. And even through the time of the judges, this idea spreads out a little bit. Because like Deborah at the very beginning, she was a judge and she was a prophet. Okay, but by the time we go through here, we're going to see this at the beginning of the book of Samuel. So through the book of Judges, so the judges, the area of civic leadership, these guys are corrupt now. Okay, it ends in Samuel. It ends in Samson. The priesthood, okay, so we have the house of Eli, he is ministering as the high priest at Shiloh, and his sons are apostate, and they're abusing the sacrifices, and they're abusing the women who come to the temple. And then the prophets, we're going to find out that at the time of Samuel, there is no seer in Israel. So we had Moses, who was the civic, patriarchal, pastoral leader of Israel. He was also the prophetic leader of Israel, and he was operating in the capacity of the priesthood. He was making altars, he was doing sacrifices. All right. Then we have this transition where now we have a priesthood. Aaron is anointed, his sons are anointed. All right. Joshua, who is also considered a prophet, is going to be the next civil leader, but now other prophets are rising up. This fully kind of splits within the book of Judges, where we're going to have prophets that are independent of the judges, who are independent of the priesthood. But we go through 400 years, and now the priesthood's corrupt, the judges are corrupt, and there's no seer in Israel, and Israel's basically Canaanite again. All right, and so now we need a reset. We need a new Moses, and so that's going to be Samuel. And we're going to find out within the first couple chapters that he's a prophet. He's going to be executing office of priesthood, and he's going to be the judge. And then he's going to transition, and we're going to have a new Joshua, and that's going to be David. And he's going to kill giants, just like the old Joshua. And it's going to be David, of whom God says, you are going to pastor, you're going to shepherd my people. And it's through Samuel and David that Israel is going to be restored to the intent that God had for them, to be a people who love him and love everybody else and show the Gentiles how all this works. All right? And so before we get to that, though, we're going to transition through Saul. Because in the same way with Moses, who the people of God didn't want to do things on God's timing, right here, the people of God are not going to want to do things on God's timing. David hasn't been born yet, or he's in diapers. He's not ready to be king, but they don't want to wait. They want a king. And so again, we have this parallel between these two things. And that's what we will get into next week. So I would say probably start working on 1 Samuel. And again, we're not going to do this exegetically, but I want to highlight a few things with David, and I want to look at a few of the areas at which often don't get looked at with David. So like his time as a haperu and that kind of stuff. And then we're going to start moving through. If I think about it, if I remember, and if I have time, one of the things I've always wanted to do is a parallel study through 1st and 2nd Samuel with the Psalms that David wrote at those various points. And I'll try to set aside some time and start matching those up so I can throw them out there. Because quite a few of the Psalms, it tells you the period of time in which David wrote them. And you can line them up with what's going on here. And yeah, okay, very cool. All right, I'm going to close this prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for today. Thank you that really just no matter how crazy your people get, there's always a remnant, and you always have mercy. and you're always saving people. And yeah, you're faithful, and you're so merciful. And we thank you for it. In Christ's name, amen.